This is Kate at the Library of Whispers, and today I thought we would start reading this lovely book by Geoffrey of Monmouth. It's called The History of the Kings of Britain, so it's going to be a new series. I'm going to try and read all the book in various episodes. Now, you may have seen recently that my daughter sent me this book. It was a bit of a surprise, but I'm very excited to begin reading it. Now, if you don't know much about this book or about Geoffrey of Monmouth, I'm going to give you a very quick idea of who he was and what the book is about before I start. So, Geoffrey of Monmouth was a cleric and a writer active in Britain in the early 12th century. Best known for his influential work, Historia Regum Britanniae, or the History of the Kings of Britain. This book here. Although relatively little is known about Geoffrey's personal life, he's thought to have been born in or around or near Monmouth in south east Wales and later became Bishop of St Asaph. He wrote at a time when Britain was politically fragmented and culturally diverse, shaped by the legacies of Roman rule, Anglo-Saxon kingdoms and the Norman conquest of 1066. So, the book and why he wrote it. The History of the Kings of Britain, completed around 1136, presents a sweeping narrative of British history from the mythical founding of Britain by Brutus of Troy to the 7th century. as a historian in the modern sense, and more as a myth maker and literary innovator. His work stands at the intersection of history, legend, and politics. Though unreliable as a record of real events, we need to remember that. The history of the kings of Britain played a crucial role in forming ideas of British identity and in transmitting legends that remain central to British cultural history. Okay, I hope that helps. So we're going to begin with chapter 1, and now this was actually inside this book when I got it the other day, the Folio Society. It's quite useful as a bookmark, so I'll pop it there. So this is part 1. Brutus occupies the island of Albion. Britain, the best of islands, is situated in the Western Ocean between France and Ireland. It stretches for 800 miles in length and for 200 in breadth. It provides in unfailing plenty everything that is suited to the use of human beings. It abounds in every kind of mineral. It has broad fields and hillsides which are suitable for the most intensive farming, and in which, because of the richness of the soil, all kinds of crops are grown in their seasons. It also has open woodlands which are filled with every kind of game. Through its forest glades stretch pasture lands which provide the various feeding stuffs needed by cattle, and there too grow flowers of every hue which offer their honey to the flitting bee. At the foot of its wind-swept mountains it has meadows green with grass, beauty spots where clear springs flow into shining streams which ripple gently and murmur an assurance of deep sleep to those lying on their banks. What is more, it is watered by lakes and rivers full of fish, and at its southern end by a narrow strait across which men sail to France. There are 3 noble rivers, the Thames, the Severn, and the Humber, and these it stretches out as though they were 3 arms. Into them goods from across the ocean are carried, merchandise coming from all countries by this same sea traffic. In earlier times, Britain was graced by 28 cities. Some of these, in the depopulated areas, are now mouldering away, with their walls broken. Others remain whole and have in them the shrines of saints, with towers built up to a noble height, where whole companies of men and women offer praise in God according to the Christian tradition. Lastly, Britain is inhabited by 5 races of people. The Norman French, the Britons, was under the impression that he was aiming his weapon at these stags, hit his own father below the breast. As the result of this death, Brutus was expelled from Italy by his relations, who were angry with him for having committed such a crime. He went in exile to certain parts of Greece, and there he discovered the descendants of Aeneas, Priam's son, who were held captive Pandrasus was greatly surprised that people whom he had held in slavery should be so bold that they could send messages to him. He summoned a council of his leaders and decided to collect an army and to pursue the Trojans. While he was searching the wastelands in the neighbourhood of the castle of Sparatinum, where he thought they were, Brutus made a sally with 3,000 men and suddenly attacked when Pandrasus was least expecting anything of the sort. Having heard of the coming of Pandrasus, Brutus had entered this castle the night before, so that he might make a surprise attack on the Greeks, as they passed by unarmed and marching in broken order. The Trojans charged them and attacked them fiercely, aiming at killing as many as they could. In their utter stupefaction, the Greeks fled in all directions. With the king at their head, they rushed across the river Acalon, which flowed nearby. As they forded the river, they were in grave danger from the whirling current of its water. Brutus attacked them as they fled, and by his assault he slaughtered some of them in the river and others on the bank. This double death which he was inflicting gave him immense pleasure as he rushed to and fro in the battle. Antigonus, the brother of Pandrasus, was greatly distressed when he observed what was happening. He marshalled his scattered forces into formation, then he turned and charged swiftly at the raging Trojans. He preferred to meet death while fighting rather than turn in cowardly flight and be drowned in the muddy whirlpools of the river. He moved forward in close formation and exhorted his men to resist bravely and to hurl back with all their might the weapons which were causing such slaughter among them. This availed him little or nothing. The Trojans were fully equipped, their enemies were virtually unarmed. Because of this, the Trojans pressed on all the more boldly, and the slaughter which they inflicted was very heavy. They continued to attack in this way until almost all the Greeks were killed, and they had captured Antigonus and his comrade Anacletus. Once Brutus had made sure of victory, he garrisoned the fortress with 600 soldiers, and then set off for the hidden recesses of the forest groves where the Trojan people were waiting for his help. Pandrasus, on the other hand, was upset by his own flight, and by the fact that his brother was captured, and spent that night in rallying his scattered forces. When the next day dawned, he set off with his reformed army to besiege the castle, for he imagined that Brutus had himself occupied it, taking with him Antigonus and the other captives whom he had seized. As soon as he reached the walls, Pandrasus reconnoitred the site of the castle, divided his army into troops, and stationed them at various places round the perimeter. Some he ordered to prevent those inside from coming out, some that they should cut off the watercourses which ran from the rivers, and others that with a great number of battering rams and other machines of war they should shatter the fabric of the walls. They followed his instructions with good results, and strove with great zeal, and in every way they could imagine, to harass the besieged was himself greatly preoccupied by the fact that he did not have enough soldiers to permit him to join battle in the field. He relied instead upon a cunning plan, thinking that he would approach the enemy's camp in the night, and that once he had tricked their guards, he would slaughter them as they slept. However, this could not be achieved without the assent and the assistance of one of the Greeks. Brutus therefore summoned Anacletus, the comrade of Antigonus, drew his sword out of its scabbard and said to him, "My fine young friend, unless you agree faithfully to what I propose, and to carry out what I order you to do, this is the end of your life, and of that of Antigonus too. This coming night I intend to attack the Greeks' camp and to slaughter them when they least expect it. I am afraid that their sentinels may discover my intention, and so hinder my plan, insofar as it is necessary for me to attack their sentinels first. I want them to be deceived by your behaviour, so that I can come within striking distance of the others in safety. You must carry out this cunning plan for me. Go to the besiegers in the second hour of the night, and allay their suspicion by lying to them. Say that you have freed Antigonus from where I held him prisoner, taken him to a valley in the woods, and hidden him there among the bushes. Pretend that he is unable to go any farther, because of the chains with which he is shackled. Then lead them to the edge of the glade, and if they are going to free him, I shall be there with a band of armed men, ready to kill them." Anacletus was terrified by the sight of the sword, which threatened him with death all the time that Brutus was speaking. He swore that he would carry out his order, if only he himself and Antigonus too were allowed to live. The bargain was struck between them, and at the second hour of the night, which had already nearly come, he started on his way towards the siege, as he had been ordered. When he finally came near to the camp, the sentinels, who were keeping a watchful eye on all the obscure spots in the neighbourhood, gathered around him on all sides. They asked him what he had come for, and if he was there to betray the army. He pretended to be overjoyed at seeing them, and answered them in this way: "I am not here to betray my own people. I have escaped from the Trojans' prison. I beg you to come with me to your own Antigonus, whom I have rescued from the fetters of Brutus. He is hampered by the weight of his chains, and I have told him to stay hidden in the bushes a short distance back on the edge of the forest, until I could find some of you whom I could bring to free him." They were not sure whether he was telling the truth or not, but one of their number appeared, who recognized Anacletus, greeted him, and told his companions who he was. They hesitated no longer, but called the others, who were some way off, to come quickly. They followed Anacletus to the wood, where, according to what he had said, Antigonus lay hidden. As they made their way through the bushes, Brutus attacked them with his armed bands. He charged at them, and terrified as they were, he was able to inflict frightful slaughter upon them. Then he set out for the siege. He divided his comrades into 3 companies, and ordered each band to go to a different part of the camp, discreetly and without making a sound. Once they were in position, they were not to kill anyone until he himself had seized the king's tent with his own troop. He would then blow his horn as a signal to them. When Brutus had told the Trojans what they were to do, as he stood in front of the tent of Pandrosus, which was burning 20 more than all the others, Brutus gave his men the signal without waiting any longer. The moment they heard it, they quickly drew their swords, went into the sleeping quarters of the unconscious enemy, and with deadly effect dealt blow after blow. In this way the Trojans moved forward through the camp, showing pity to none. The Greeks woke up at the groans of the dying, and when they set eye on those who were about to butcher them, they were stupefied, like sheep suddenly attacked by wolves. They saw no way of protecting themselves, for they had no time either to pick up their weapons or to take flight. Themselves unarmed, the Greeks ran to and fro between the armed men wherever their panic led them, but all the time they were being cut to pieces by the Trojans who were attacking them. Anyone who got away half alive was dashed against the rocks and the tree trunks as he rushed along in his desire for escape, and so gave up his soul together with his blood. Anyone who, protected only by his shield or by some other covering, rushed headlong through the pitch-dark night in fear of death and came upon these same rocks, fell there, and as he fell, his arms or legs were shattered. He who avoided both of these disasters was drowned in the rivers which flowed nearby, for he did not know where to flee. Aeneas of Danas, you will never enjoy lasting peace as long as the brothers, sons, and grandsons of those on whom you have inflicted decisive defeat remain intermingled with you or your neighbours. They will always remember the slaughter of their relatives, and they will hate you forever. They will take offence at the merest trifles, and they will do all in their power to take vengeance. Since you command the smaller force, you will not have the strength to be able to resist the attacks of the local inhabitants. If any dispute should arise between you and them, their number will increase daily, while your own will get smaller. My advice, therefore, is that you should ask Pandrasus for the hand of his eldest daughter, whom they call Ignoge, as a comfort to your leader. With her you should ask for gold and silver, ships and grain, and everything else that you will need for your journey. If we can arrange all this, we should obtain the king's permission, and then sail away to other lands. When Membritius had finished his speech, which was longer than what I have recorded, the entire assembly agreed with him. They decreed that Pandrasus should be brought into their midst, and that, unless he agreed to what they demanded, he should be condemned to a most cruel death. He was led in straight away, and was placed on a seat higher than the others. When he had been told what tortures would be inflicted on him if he did not do the things that were demanded, he made the following reply. the silence with these words. O powerful goddess, terror of the forest glades, yet hope of the wild woodlands, you who have the power to go in orbit through the airy heavens and the halls of hell, pronounce a judgment which concerns the earth. Tell me which lands you wish us to inhabit. Tell me of a safe dwelling place where I am to worship you down the ages, and where, to the chanting of maidens, I shall dedicate temples to you. This he said 9 times. 4 times he proceeded around the altar, pouring the wine which he held upon the sacrificial hearth. Then he lay down upon the skin of a hind, which he had stretched before the altar. Having sought for slumber, he at last fell asleep. It was then about the 3rd hour of the night, when mortal beings succumb to the sweetest rest. It seemed to him that the goddess stood before him and spoke these words to him. Brutus, beyond the setting of the sun, past the realms of Gaul, there lies an island in the sea, once occupied by giants. Now it is empty and ready for your folk. Down the years this will prove an abode suited to you and to your people, and for your descendants it will be a second Troy. A race of kings will be born there from your stock, and the round circle of the whole earth will be subject to them. When he awoke from this vision, the leader remained in doubt as to whether it had been a dream which he had experienced, or whether the living goddess really had prophesied the land to which he should travel. In the end, he called his comrades together and told them in full detail what had happened to him in his sleep. They were delighted, and advised him to turn back to the ships and to travel westwards under full sail in search of what the goddess had promised them, while the wind still blew fair. Without wasting time, they turned back to their friends and put to sea. After ploughing through the waves in a crossing which lasted 30 days, they arrived in Africa, still not knowing in which direction they should steer their ships. Then they came to the altars of the Philistines, and to the salt pan lake, and from there they sailed on between Rusicada and the mountains of Sarek. In this spot they suffered great danger from an attack by pirates, but they beat it off and became the richer by booty and plunder. After this they passed the river Malve and landed in Mauritania. There they were harassed by lack of food and drink. They therefore disembarked from their ships, split up into groups, and ravaged the country from end to end. Once they had re-victualled, they sailed for the Pillars of Hercules, and there those deep-sea monsters called the Sirens made their appearance, and nearly sank their ships as they moved forward. They escaped, however, and came upon 4 generations born to exiles from Troy, generations which had accompanied Antenor in his flight. Their leader was called Aeneas, a sober-minded man, wise in counsel, yet of great courage and audacity. If he were to come up against a giant, he would overthrow him as easily as if he were fighting against a mere boy. As soon as they had realized that his stock was of such high antiquity, they took him into alliance with them straight away, together with the people over whom he ruled. Later, Cornwall was called after the name of this leader. In every battle, he was of more help to Brutus than anyone else. Next, they came to Aquitaine, where they entered the estuary of Loire and cast anchor. They remained there for 7 days and explored the lie of the land. At that time, Geoffrey the Pict ruled in Aquitaine, was king of that country. When he learned that a foreign people with a huge fleet severed an arm and a hand. From another, he carved the very shoulders from his body. At a single blow, he struck off one man's head, while from another he cut away the legs. He was the one whom they all attacked, and he in his turn took them all on. Brutus was filled with emotion when he saw this, and he hurried forward with one of his companies to bring assistance to Corinus. A great bellow of shouting arose between the two peoples. Many blows were struck, and terrible slaughter was inflicted on each side. This could not go on much longer. The Trojans were victorious. They drove King Geoffrey and his Portavans backward in flight. Geoffrey managed to get away. He fled to the other regions of Gaul to seek help from his kinsmen and friends. At that time there were in Gaul 12 kings of equal rank, under whose dominion the whole country was ruled. They received Geoffrey sympathetically and promised with one accord that they would drive this foreign people out of the lands of Aquitaine. Brutus was overjoyed at this victory. He enriched his comrades with the spoils of those whom they had killed, marshalled them once more into companies, and then marched through the country in this order, for it was his intention to sack it completely and to load his ships with all its goods. He therefore burned the cities far and wide, heaping up fire upon fire. He carried away the goods which he had looted in these cities, and he even ravaged the open fields. He wrought pitiable slaughter on both townsfolk and peasantry, for his plan was to exterminate this unhappy race down to the last man. However, when Brutus had inflicted this devastation on almost all the regions of Aquitaine, he came to the place which is now called Tours, the city which, as Homer testifies, he himself afterwards founded. When he was examining places suitable for a refuge, it was here that he measured out a camp into which he might retreat if need should arise. He was driven to this by the fear caused by the arrival of Geoffrey, who had marched to this same neighbourhood with the kings and princes of Gaul and a huge force of armed men, so that he might do battle with Brutus. When his own camp was completely finished, Brutus waited there 2 days for Geoffrey, relying on his own prudence and the courage of the young men whom he had under command. When Geoffrey learned of the presence of the Trojans in this neighbourhood, he advanced by forced marches through the day and the night until he came close enough to see the camp of Brutus. He gazed at it grimly, and then with a sardonic smile burst forth with these words: "How sad my destiny is! These ignoble exiles have pitched their camp in my kingdom. Arm yourselves, men, arm yourselves, and charge through the serried ranks. In a short time we shall seize hold of these weaklings as if they were sheep, and carry them captive through our kingdom." All the men he had brought with him immediately armed themselves and marched, drawn up as they were in 12 columns, towards the enemy. The reaction of Brutus to this was far from that of a weakling. He placed his companies in position and Gauls caused great slaughter among the Trojans and forced them to withdraw into their camp. When this victory was won, the Gauls besieged the Trojans in their camp, firm in the conviction that they themselves would never withdraw until the enemy, whom they had surrounded, had either offered their necks to be encircled with chains, or had been cruelly tortured to death after suffering for a long time from hunger. Meanwhile, on the next evening, Aeneas had a conference with Brutus, saying that he wanted to make his way out that same night along certain little-known trackways and conceal himself until daybreak in a neighbouring wood. Brutus should leave the camp at first light, and while he was engaging the enemy, Aeneas should attack from the rear. By charging at them, bring about the overthrow of the Gauls. This plan of Aeneas's was approved by Brutus. Aeneas emerged with all caution, as he had promised, occupied by 3,000 men, and made his way into the depths of the woods. When the next day dawned, Brutus arranged his troops in battalions, opened up the gates of the camp, and marched forth to battle. The Gauls immediately attacked him. They drew up their own line of battle and fought with Brutus hand to hand. Each side inflicted wounds on the other, and in both the two armies many thousands of men immediately fell dead, for no one spared his opponent. A certain Trojan called Turnus, who was a nephew of Brutus, was there, and apart from Aeneas, no one was stronger or bolder than he. He slew 600 men himself with his own sword, but he was killed before his time by the Gauls, who made a sudden attack on him. The city of Doors, which we have already mentioned, took its name from Turnus, for he was buried there. While the troops on either side were fighting bitterly, Aeneas unexpectedly attacked the enemy from the rear, coming at full speed. Thereupon the other Trojans pressed on with all the more courage, and renewed the attack from the front in their effort to complete the slaughter. The Gauls were terrified as much as anything by the din raised by Aeneas as he charged them from the rear, for they thought that more men had come than were really there. They left the field at full speed, and the Trojans pursued them with their blows. In their pursuit, the Trojans continued to slaughter the Gauls, and they did not abandon the bloodshed until they had gained victory. Although this signal triumph brought him great joy, Brutus was nevertheless filled with anxiety, for the number of his men became smaller every day, while that of the Gauls was constantly increasing. Brutus was in